Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. It is going to be a very warm day in Riverside, with temperatures reaching a high of 90 degrees and dipping to a low of 65.6 degrees later tonight. Please make sure to stay cool and hydrated if you are out and about. In today's episode, we are taking a closer look at the complex reasons why U.S. citizen children are facing separation from their parents. We will also examine how the new Department of Homeland Security Secretary intends to address the ongoing challenges currently affecting airport security. Plus, we have a variety of other important headlines to cover that are shaping our world today. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We start this morning with a sweeping investigation into immigration enforcement under the Trump administration's second term. An exclusive analysis by ProPublica, drawing on federal data pried loose through a public records lawsuit, paints a striking picture of how aggressively the government has moved to detain immigrant parents of American-born children. Ethan covers immigration policy for us. Ethan, how big are the numbers we're talking about here?
The numbers are staggering, Grace. Federal data obtained by the University of Washington Center for Human Rights shows that more than 11,000 U.S. citizen children had a parent arrested and detained in just the first 7 months of this administration. That tracking runs through mid-August of last year. To put it simply, that works out to more than 50 American kids losing a parent to the detention system every single day.
50 kids a day. How does that compare to what we saw under President Biden?
ProPublica's team found that this is roughly double the rate of parent detentions during the final 3 years of the Biden administration. But the shift goes beyond raw numbers. The American Immigration Council and the Washington Informer have both noted that the Biden administration leaned heavily on alternatives to detention, things like GPS ankle monitors and the SmartLink app. Under the current approach, so-called street arrests, or at-large arrests, have surged by 1,100%. Which signals a fundamental pivot from digital monitoring to physical lockup.
And I understand the enforcement isn't just hitting fathers. Who exactly is being swept up?
That's one of the most striking findings. ProPublica and the Rio Grande Guardian report that mothers of U.S. citizens are now being deported at 4 times the rate of the previous administration. About 60% of arrested mothers are actually deported, compared to 30% before. And critically, more than half of detained fathers and 75% of the mothers had no criminal convictions beyond minor traffic or immigration-related offenses. These are long-term residents, not violent criminals.
So what's driving this shift on the policy side?
It comes down to a directive rewrite that's gotten a lot of attention. The administration took the 2022 Parental Interests Directive, which was ICE 11064.3, and replaced it with something called the Detained Parents Directive. According to ProPublica and WLRN, one of the most telling changes is that officials removed the word humane from the instructions on how ICE officers should interact with parents. The new version reportedly prioritizes an enforcement target of 3,000 arrests per day over family unity considerations.
They literally struck the word humane from the document?
They did, and advocacy groups say the consequences are real. The Women's Refugee Commission reports that while the revised directive technically still allows parents to make care arrangements for their children, ICE agents frequently ignore those protocols in practice. Some groups are calling the result family separation 2.0 because the effect on families mirrors what we saw during the first-term family separation crisis, even if the formal mechanism looks different on paper.
Let's talk about where these parents are actually being held. There's a facility in Florida that's gotten a lot of attention.
Right, the South Florida Detention Facility, which Florida Attorney General James Youthmeyer has nicknamed Alligator Alcatraz. It sits on a remote airstrip inside the Big Cypress National Preserve in the Everglades. The site is surrounded by swamps full of alligators and pythons. During a tour last July, President Trump praised the animals as, quote, bodyguards, end quote. Reports from WLRN, the Florida, Phoenix, and ProPublica describe brutal conditions, with detainees held in makeshift tents and cages in 100-degree heat with very little medical care.
How is a detention facility operating inside a national preserve?
That's become one of the biggest legal questions in this story. The administration and the state of Florida are using a legal theory called disaggregated state action. Essentially, they classify the site as a state-run facility rather than a federal one, even though federal detainees are held there. ProPublica reports that this designation lets the Department of Justice argue the site is exempt from the National Environmental Policy Act, which would normally require environmental reviews. It also lets them argue the 1997 Flores Settlement Agreement doesn't apply, since that agreement mandates releasing children and families within 20 days.
And are people being held longer than 20 days?
Internal documents suggest detainees are being held for 30 to 60 days. There are also indications that arrival dates are being reset to conceal how long someone has actually been in custody. That's a direct end run around the Flores protections. By calling it a state facility managed by Florida and private contractors, the administration is creating a jurisdictional gray zone that makes legal accountability extremely difficult.
There's been a major fight over funding for this facility too. What's the latest there?
2 weeks ago today, on March 10th, FEMA officially lifted a $608.4 million environmental funding hold on the facility. The administration argued the grant covered operational costs like food and medical care, not construction, so it didn't require an environmental and historic preservation review. That decision immediately drew a legal challenge. Just a week later, on March 17th, the Miccosukee tribe and Friends of the Everglades filed an emergency motion to block distribution of those funds.
What's their argument?
They contend the facility sits on sacred land and poses a direct threat to the Everglades ecosystem. As Bloomberg Law and Orlando Weekly report, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has scheduled oral arguments for April 8th in Miami. The central question is whether federal funding effectively federalizes the project enough to trigger mandatory environmental safeguards. That ruling could determine whether the facility can continue operating in its current form.
Let's come back to the families caught up in all of this. What do we know about the children left behind?
Because U.S. citizen children can't legally be held in immigration detention, many of them end up stranded. The ACLU and PBS report that the administration is effectively using what they call de facto family separation. Parents are forced to choose between leaving their American children behind in the U.S. or taking them to countries those kids have never known. Some children end up with relatives or friends. Others wind up in the foster care system. It's a crisis that doesn't show up in any single government database.
ProPublica highlighted some specific families. What story stood out to you?
Several are gut-wrenching. In Lakeland, Florida, a woman named Doris Flores was arrested in January and forced to hand her 4-month-old U.S. citizen baby to a pastor. In Lake Worth Beach, a 30-year resident named Olga Perez, who served as a Guatemalan Maya translator in her community, was picked up during a traffic stop. Her 4 American children were left in limbo while she was transferred to a facility in Arizona. And then there's the case of 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos, whose image in a blue bunny hat during detention sparked national protests and a letter from nearly 4,000 health professionals demanding the release of children from immigration custody.
That image of the boy in the bunny hat really did become a flashpoint, didn't it?
It did, and it crystallized something that the data alone can't fully capture. ProPublica and photojournalist Cengiz Yar have been documenting these stories visually, and those images have driven public awareness in a way that spreadsheets and court filings simply don't. When people see a 5-year-old in a detention setting, it forces a different kind of reckoning with what these policies mean on the ground. The health professionals who signed that letter specifically cited the long-term psychological damage of separating young children from their parents.
Where does all of this stand right now, legally and politically?
There are multiple fronts. The 11th Circuit case on April 8th could reshape the funding and environmental questions around Alligator Alcatraz. Courts are also weighing broader challenges to the Flores workarounds. Politically, the administration shows no signs of slowing down. That 3,000 arrests per day target tells you where their priorities are. Meanwhile, Advocacy groups, tribal nations, and legal organizations are scrambling to challenge each piece of this enforcement apparatus as fast as it expands.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that. A lot of moving parts in this story.
Thanks, Grace, and it's one we'll keep following closely.
We will indeed. Still ahead, we've got our second story of the morning coming up right after this. We've also got a major shakeup at the Department of Homeland Security to tell you about this morning. Chloe, the Senate confirmed a new secretary just last night, right?
That's right, Grace. Late last night, the Senate voted 54-45 to confirm Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma as the new Secretary of Homeland Security. It was reported by KTTC News and the Associated Press almost immediately. As of this morning, Mullin is officially on the job, stepping into what might be the most difficult cabinet post in Washington right now.
54-45 sounds close to a party line vote. Were there any surprises?
Actually, yes, a few notable ones. Democratic Senators John Fetterman of Pennsylvania and Martin Heinrich of New Mexico both crossed over to support Mullin. But the real eyebrow raiser was on the Republican side. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was the only GOP member to vote no. According to the Los Angeles Times, Paul, who actually chairs the Homeland Security Committee, said he had deep reservations about Mullin's, quote, temperament and character, end quote. That apparently stems from a pretty combative confirmation hearing process.
Mullin's got an interesting background for a cabinet secretary, doesn't he?
He really does. He's a former mixed martial arts fighter and also owned a plumbing business before entering politics. So he's coming from a very different world than most people who've held this job. He's replacing Kristi Noem, who President Trump fired earlier this month. CBS News and The Guardian report that Noem's tenure fell apart under public backlash over what were described as squalid conditions in detention centers. She also drew heavy criticism for calling a fatal Border Patrol shooting back in January, quote, domestic terrorism, end quote.
So Mullin walks in the door this morning, and what's waiting for him?
Honestly, a mess. The biggest immediate crisis is a partial government shutdown that's now in its 39th day. It started on February 14th, and ABC News and Bond TV report that roughly 100,000 so-called essential employees at DHS have been working without pay for over 5 weeks. That makes this the longest funding lapse the department has ever faced, and the effects are hitting travelers hard, especially at airports.
I know there's been a lot of talk about TSA officers calling out sick. How bad has it actually gotten?
It's severe, Grace. What people are calling the blue flu has really taken hold. CBS News cites data showing that nearly 12% of the entire TSA workforce was absent by late March. But some airports are in far worse shape than that. Houston's Hobby Airport hit a 40% call-out rate. Atlanta reported 38%. New Orleans came in at 36%. And it's not just absences. More than 400 TSA officers have officially resigned since the shutdown began, telling officials they're dealing with mounting debt and even facing eviction.
What does that mean for people actually trying to fly right now?
It means chaos at some of the country's busiest airports. The Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer report that several major hubs have reached what they're calling a breaking point. In Philadelphia and Atlanta, travelers have faced wait times exceeding 5 hours just to get through security. Several airlines have started issuing travel waivers so passengers can rebook without penalty. It's an extraordinary situation that's really testing people's patience.
So how is the administration trying to fill that gap?
This is where things get really controversial. President Trump has ordered immigration and customs enforcement agents to bolster security at 14 major airport hubs, including JFK, LAX, Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, and O'Hare in Chicago. The Los Angeles Times described it as an unprecedented and deepening standoff. Time and PBS News report that as of this morning, hundreds of ICE agents in tactical gear are inside these airports, performing what the administration calls non-specialized support roles.
What exactly are those ICE agents doing at the checkpoints?
According to those same reports, they're handling things like document verification, crowd control, and monitoring exit lanes. The idea is to free up the remaining certified TSA staff to focus on the work that ICE agents legally cannot do, like X-ray screening and physical pat-downs. Under the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, only TSA-certified personnel can perform those functions. So there's a hard legal line that limits how much ICE can actually take over.
There was also something about face masks, right? A directive from the president?
Yes. According to Aviation A2Z, President Trump issued a specific directive yesterday ordering ICE agents not to wear face masks while assisting at airports. That's a departure from their standard tactical equipment. It could be read as a transparency gesture, wanting the public to see who these agents are. But it also makes the armed agents more visible and identifiable, which is raising its own set of concerns depending on who you talk to.
And that gets into the civil rights side of this. What are advocacy groups saying?
Quite a lot, actually. While the administration says this deployment is purely administrative, investigations by the Identity Project and Democracy Docket suggest there's a broader enforcement agenda at play. CNN reported that Border Czar Tom Homan explicitly stated that agents would continue to, quote, enforce immigration laws, end quote, while in terminals. He specifically mentioned targeting individuals from Somali communities. That's raised alarm bells among civil liberties groups across the board.
Have there been actual incidents of enforcement activity at airports?
There have. The San Francisco Chronicle and the National Immigration Law Center have documented cases of ICE agents conducting what they call suspicionless stops. They've also reported on real-time biometric data sharing, essentially linking TSA facial recognition systems to ICE removal databases to flag individuals with administrative warrants right at the gate. And yesterday, a viral video from San Francisco International showed ICE agents restraining a woman at a terminal. The National Immigration Law Center warns that TSA checkpoints create what they call a mandatory encounter point, meaning travelers can't simply walk away.
Let's step back to the bigger picture. Why is the government still shut down after 39 days?
It goes back to a tragedy in Minneapolis in January. The Guardian, NPR News, and PBS all reported that 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, were shot and killed by federal agents during protests connected to an operation called Metro Surge. Those deaths became a political flashpoint. Senate Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, have refused to restore DHS funding unless the administration agrees to a series of guardrails on federal enforcement.
What kind of guardrails are Democrats demanding?
3 main things. First, they want a requirement for judicial warrants rather than administrative ones before agents can enter private homes. Second, they're pushing for mandatory body cameras and a ban on masks for federal agents during operations. And third, they want a flat prohibition on enforcement at sensitive locations like schools and hospitals. These are non-negotiable for the Democratic caucus right now, and the White House hasn't been willing to meet them.
Has there been any movement at all toward a deal?
There were some attempts over the weekend, but they actually went backward. Time reports that President Trump insisted DHS funding be, quote, welded, end quote, to the Save America Act. That's a bill requiring documentary proof of citizenship for voter registration, which is a complete non-starter for Democrats. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has tried to broker a middle option that would fund the TSA and the Coast Guard while carving out ICE enforcement funds separately. But the White House has largely rejected those efforts too.
So what tone is Mullen trying to set on his first day?
He's clearly trying to position himself as a calm, stabilizing presence. Courthouse News and KTTC report that he described himself as a steady hand who wants to move the department, quote, off the front page, end quote. In a notable departure from Noam, he signaled some willingness to consider the Democratic demand for judicial warrants. He also pledged to overhaul parts of FEMA, specifically revoking a rule that requires the Secretary's personal approval for any contract over $100,000. NPR reports that rule has severely bottlenecked disaster responses and operations across the agency.
Are the unions and civil liberties groups buying this new tone?
Not yet. The American Federation of Government Employees remains in fierce opposition to the ICE deployment at airports. AFGE President Everett Kelly called it an attempt to replace professional TSA officers with, quote, untrained, armed agents, end quote. And the ACLU says it's actively monitoring the situation for signs of intimidation and racial profiling. But as of this morning, there are no active court injunctions blocking the airport deployment. So legally, everything the administration is doing continues.
Where does this all stand as of right now?
We're in a very precarious spot, Grace. The shutdown is in its 39th day with no deal in sight. If Congress doesn't reach an agreement by the end of this week, this will officially become the longest funding lapse in the department's entire history. Mullen may be projecting calm, but the TSA crisis, the ICE presence at airports, and this legislative standoff over Minneapolis and the Save America Act are all colliding at once. It's a lot for any new secretary to untangle on day one.
Really complicated story on so many fronts. Chloe, thanks for walking us through all of that.
Happy to, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The nation's highest court is pushing the envelope when it comes to the future of voting rights. During oral arguments for Watson versus the Republican National Committee on March 23, 2026, the conservative majority expressed deep skepticism toward state laws that allow mail-in ballots to be counted if they arrive after Election Day. Justices Samuel Alito and Brett Kavanaugh questioned whether Mississippi's 5-day grace period for postmarked ballots conflicts with federal statutes that establish a single, uniform day for the nation to head to the polls. Justice Kavanaugh raised concerns that late-arriving ballots could undermine public confidence and create an appearance of fraud if they shift election results days after the polls close. This legal battle is postmarked for trouble, as a ruling against such grace periods would force 14 states and the District of Columbia to overhaul their voting procedures just months before the 2026 midterm elections. While the Republican National Committee and the Trump administration argue for a strict receipt deadline, civil rights groups warn that such a change could return the voices of thousands of rural and overseas voters to sender. A final decision is expected by late June, setting a tight timeline for state legislatures to adjust. Voters in Denmark are heading to the poll position today for a snap parliamentary election that has everyone feeling a bit chilly. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called for the early vote after a cold front developed in geopolitical relations with the United States over the status of Greenland. Frederiksen is hoping to capitalize on a Greenland bounce in approval ratings after she firmly told President Donald Trump that the territory was not for sale. While foreign policy sparked the flame, the campaign is now burning through domestic concerns, like a proposed wealth tax to fund education and rising cost of living pressures. This election is a critical test for Frederiksen's Grand Coalition, the first in decades to bridge the traditional left-right divide, which is currently projected to lose its majority. The outcome will determine if Denmark continues its restrictive migration path, including a proposed emergency brake on asylum, or shifts toward the center-right, led by Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen. With high turnout expected among the 4,300,000 eligible voters, the results will also impact Arctic security and Denmark's stance within NATO. The administration is blowing off renewable energy in favor of a fossil-fueled future. On March 23, a nearly $1 billion deal was announced with the French giant Total Energies to cancel offshore wind leases off the coasts of New York and North Carolina. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum characterized the agreement as a move to end unreliable and costly subsidies, while President Trump reiterated his opposition, claiming turbines are environmentally bad and harmful to wildlife. This follows a year-long campaign to halt wind projects via executive order. While the administration is gassed up about redirecting that capital into domestic natural gas and LNG production, industry analysts warn the move effectively strangles the offshore wind pipeline and could raise long-term electricity costs. Things are heating up in the Middle East as Iran launched multiple waves of ballistic missiles at Israel, including a direct strike on an upscale neighborhood in Tel Aviv that injured at least 4 people. While President Trump announced a 5-day postponement of planned strikes on Iranian power plants, following what he called very good talks with Tehran. The Iranian parliament speaker explicitly denied any negotiations were underway. Concurrently, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz declared the IDF will take control of a security zone in southern Lebanon, up to the Litani River, confirming that all bridges over the water have been destroyed to prevent Hezbollah movements. It is a crude awakening for the global economy, as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has seen a 97% drop in maritime traffic, sending oil prices surging above $100 per barrel during this 25-day-old conflict. Finally, a civil jury in Santa Monica has delivered a verdict that is no laughing matter for Bill Cosby. The 88-year-old was found liable for the 1972 sexual assault and battery of Donna Motzinger, awarding her a total of $59,250,000 in damages. The award includes $19,250,000 for past and future suffering, plus $40 million in punitive damages after jurors determined Cosby acted with malice, oppression, or fraud. Motzinger alleged Cosby drugged and raped her after a comedy performance, a claim the jury found more likely than not to be true. This major legal defeat was made possible by a California look-back law that revived the statute of limitations, though Cosby's attorney confirmed plans to appeal. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.